Asia Pacific is a complex region to manage. To know how to approach this challenging market, Yves Helven, our global fleet expert, APAC, will present you the state of the market.
Welcome to the Global Fleet Conference 2021. My name is Yves Helven. As you will probably know, it's hard to capture the APAC fleet landscape in a few words. So what I will be doing in the next 10 minutes is share with you in a few bullet points per country the things that you need to know before you start any project in these countries. Bit of a disclaimer first. It is the objective for this presentation to give you an idea of each country, and that also means that there are many exceptions and specifications that we will not capture. I hope this will already set the stage for the presentations that will come today. Let's start with OEMs and leasing companies. What you need to remember now is that the Asian fleet ecosystem has not yet gone through the massive consolidation phase that we know in Europe and US. This means that we still have many local players, and that even the international players are often organized locally rather than regionally. Looking at the OEMs, I'd like to mention the three biggest regional players who are also very active on the global scene. There's obviously Toyota, a massive Japanese OEM that manufactures cars in many Asian countries. This means that not all Toyotas are imported from Japan. Good example is Toyota Hilux, produced in Japan, in Thailand, or the Toyota Innova, produced in Indonesia. The production side has always been extremely important in APAC simply because of the high import taxation. For instance, in Vietnam, you'll have to pay up to 70% of import tax or special sales tax. This is, however, changing for the better. The Southeast Asian countries have now their own free trade agreement, which will bring taxation down between these countries. Nonetheless, when you select vehicles for your employees, bear in mind that there's a tax component that will potentially impact your TCO dramatically. Nissan is another Japanese OEM with very good coverage across the APAC region. Brand has very good reputation, and they're also the only Asian brand that has a true global corporate fleet sales department. So it makes your life a lot easier. Finally, Kia and Hyundai. Let's get this out of the way first. If you need cars in South Korea, you will need to select Kia and Hyundai. Koreans are very proud of their home brands, and rightly so. However, if you're looking into selecting Kia or Hyundai for your fleets across APAC, you might be in for a challenge. In most countries, you will have to negotiate locally, so be prepared for this. Let's have a look at the leasing companies. So the biggest local providers are Sumitomo and Oryx, both Japanese companies. They both have pretty good coverage across the region. What you need to know about them, especially comparing with European leasing providers, is that they will not have the same type of leasing product as the ones we know in Europe. You will find contracts on duration only, so no mileage. This also means that there is no possibility to recalculate contracts or have mileage credits at the end of the contract. Finally, quick shout out to ALD, who has just started in Malaysia with a European product and who is planning to expand in Southeast Asia. Now it's time to go into the different countries. For the purpose of this presentation, I have created country groups based on the number of criteria: geography, cultural similarities, services, and service levels. Let's kick off with North Asia, and more specifically with the biggest country in the region, China. Operational leasing is very small in China, and other acquisition methods are much more popular. Most companies and many consumers will purchase cars or take a lease loan, which is a bit of a confusing name because it's closer to a balloon finance and a real lease. Now, even if lease is available in China, most of the employees will simply expense their cost or to the company or receive a mileage expense. If you want to give cars to your employees, know that it's going to be expensive, and also know that in tier one cities such as Beijing and Shanghai, license plates are not easily available. So even if you want to give cars and you're willing to pay, you might not be able to get a plate. South Korea is next. This is a mature country from a fleet perspective. There are some really good leasing providers such as Hyundai Capital, Lotte, and SK. They offer comprehensive contracts, often on 47 months because of tax recovery reasons. It's not common to do an OEM tender because the leasing companies will include volume discounts into their pricing. Leasing tenders are, however, possible, but you'll need a Korean speaker, and you also need some patience because communication between a leasing company and a client during a tender can be quite intense. The biggest country in APAC is Japan. From a fleet perspective, leasing is extremely common, almost always on 36-month contracts because of the mandatory technical inspection or shaken, which is pretty expensive and mandatory for cars that are 3 years old. I would not recommend to do an OEM tender unless your volumes are very high. Now, the biggest obstacle in Japan is not the maturity of the market, but rather the process of making change to your supply chain. In Japan, it's not possible to change and implement a new vendor without going through a long process of building trust and relationship. It also means that your local stakeholders are not eager to go through such a tender process, and they will prefer to leave things as they are. So you'll need to come up with some pretty good arguments on why to go ahead. Hong Kong, very small fleet country and not a cheap one either. Hong Kong people usually don't have parking space for a company car, and public transport is very good as well as affordable. So best is to avoid company cars and give a budget for taxi, Uber, or public transport. Taiwan, on the contrary, is a modern, well-functioning country with very professional people. This also reflects in the corporate car ecosystem. There's a few good leasing providers, OEMs are professional, and it's not uncommon for international companies to provide a company car. Costs will be a bit higher than in Japan or Korea, but still not excessive. Let's move to South Asia. India is obviously the biggest country in the region, and the good news is that there's, amongst other, Oryx, ALD, Arval, and LeasePlan to work with, and they're pretty good at what they do. However, operational leasing is not popular, and my educated guess is that there are less than 20,000 operational lease contracts in the entire country. You do have an abundance of choice when it comes to vehicles. Many OEMs have developed products specifically for India and actually assemble or produce these vehicles in India, which is good because you avoid import tax. Now, the latest trend in India is electrification. The Indian government has launched some incentives that might be worth considering, but be aware that charging infrastructure is limited, even in the metros, which will improve gradually. Very briefly on the smaller countries in South Asia, Bangladesh people are a pleasure to work with. They're very professional and do a good job. The one thing missing in Bangladesh is the supply chain. You will have to pay for your cars or go to a bank or for a finance agreement, but there's almost no leasing provider. I would also recommend to build a good working relationship with some dealers in the biggest cities. Pakistan is an interesting country. We underestimate the number of company cars in Pakistan. It is, however, quite a challenge to provide cars. There's some local production, and the Honda Civic is an example of such a locally produced car, but many cars need to be imported from other countries, especially from Japan. Sri Lanka, you'll need to talk to rental providers or find an agreement with a dealer. It's a small island, and you will most probably don't need many cars, but they won't be cheap. Let's have a look at Southeast Asia and start with Singapore. It's very simple. You will most probably not give company cars in Singapore except to your CEO. Cars are very expensive, but public transport is amazing and mobility solutions are widely available. Thailand is becoming a big leasing country. Vendors are pretty good, although not on a Western level, and it's absolutely possible to find reasonably priced lease cars, most often Toyota Vios or Hilux or Honda Civic or City. Some lease vendors will propose products with mileage, but don't expect it from all of them. Generally, you will have few issues in Thailand. Indonesia, it's a beautiful country, but it's also a huge country. Your fleet will most probably be spread over a few of Indonesia's many islands, so there's a few things that you need to bear in mind. First, traffic in the capital region of Jakarta is horrible, and it actually doesn't make much sense to add more vehicles. So why not look at alternatives? Second, you need to know exactly where your fleet will be driving. Not all your vendors are present in all of the islands, so this will be your main selection criteria. And third, most of the leasing vendors in Indonesia are doing leasing as a side job. They are car manufacturers or they are dealer groups, but they are most often not professional leasing companies. So getting SLAs and KPIs in place can be a bit of a challenge. As for Malaysia, it's not a true leasing country, but rather an outright purchase country. This might change, however, as ALD has made its entrance into the country. Philippines, again, a big country with lots of islands. Leasing is pretty well established, although most companies in Philippines prefer to buy cars. Leasing contracts are typically in two parts, a first contract of 36 months and a second contract of 24 months. Fleet management product is also very popular in the Philippines for companies that have decided to buy cars rather than lease them. Finally, Vietnam and Cambodia, these countries are not very mature, cars are expensive, and you will need to work with your local vendors. We do expect some change in Vietnam, which is one of the most successful economies in APAC, at least in terms of GDP growth. Australia and New Zealand, let me be very short on these two countries. These are very mature markets, and you can basically expect a similar type of service than what you would expect from a European or a US provider. Just remember that Australia has an interesting product that is called novated lease. It's a sort of salary sacrifice whereby the employer deducts all or part of a lease rate from the employee's gross salary. It comes with a fair bit of administration, and leasing companies, or FMOs as they're called in Australia, can help you with that. So that's it from a country overview. What should you remember about APAC? It's solution diverse, it's supplier diverse, and it's very local. Finally, this also means that there's a lot of potential for fleet management, so it's absolutely worth investigating. From my side, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I wish you a great Global Fleet Conference today.
Thank you, Yves, for giving us the keys to unlock this promising market.